So, welcome to 13 Minutes Why Every Man Needs a Why. I am delighted and thrilled to be virtually in the studio with my friend and really important thinker in the space of meaning, of purpose, of the work of Viktor Frankl, bringing it together in the workplace, Dr. Alise Cortez. Alise, welcome.
Thank you, B. It's so great to be with you and to be on the other side of the mic.
Well, I know I've been on your podcast, Working on Purpose, multiple times and is long overdue. Now, if you ever listen, and I hope you do listen to Dr. Elise's podcast, you can get it all over major platforms. It is incredibly polished and structured and beautiful, and she's got like an enormous following. And we're going to follow my format today, which is really messy and living and go with the flow. And sometimes, at least, I worry a little bit about the guests that I have that we may not have enough to talk about. But with you, that is no worry. So here we go. Um, as you know, Elise, the podcast is based on a tragic statistic that every 13 minutes in America, a man chooses to die by suicide. And our shared teacher, mentor, Dr. Viktor Frankl, said it best: those who have a why can bear with almost any how. And when a man out there listens to the amazing why of Dr. Alise, I know that it will help strengthen him in discovering and living his why. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be unpacking Dr. Alise Cortez's why. I could rattle through your list of accomplishments, very long list: organizational psychologist, organizational logotherapist. By the way, I've never heard of an organizational logotherapist, and I'm glad it now exists. Author, speaker, you got so many books. The most recent one is The Great Revitalization: How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. And I'm sure we'll start there, bringing meaning to the workplace, but I know we're not going to end there. So, Dr. Alise, again, welcome. And why don't you kind of share with us 30,000-foot view of Alise Cortez and her why?
First, thanks for having me on, B. This is such an honor. And, I appreciate our friendship we've cultivated over the years, and the work that you do is just so critically important. So, my why really is to awaken people and organizations to their passion and purpose and to inspire them to make a contribution worthy of their one precious life. And that is really as simple as it is. And it's really very much about helping people to connect with their own internal source of energy, connection, purpose, and then aim it to be able to make that difference and that contribution that the world desperately needs.
Hmm. So desperate. And although this is a message for men and women, again, the statistic is 80% of suicides are men. And this is not a podcast on suicide. This is a podcast, as I say, on flipping the script from desperation to inspiration. I believe when somebody's out there living their purpose, that they don't get to the point of suicide. And it's particularly pointed for men in this conversation because in my book, The Guy in the Glass, the second chapter is the second question every man gets asked and answers. First one is, what's your name? Walk into a bar, walk into a boardroom, walk into, well, I would say the bedroom, but probably, hopefully, you know the person's name.
By that
Uh,
time, I hope they know your name. Yeah.
but the second question, at least in the boardroom and probably the bar, is, what do you do? And I don't think women are as prone to answer it in the way men are, and men invariably answer it by how they make money, how they pay the bills, their profession, which is a segue into you and the work that you do. So let's dig into that, especially men. What do you do? Work and meaning. Where do we go?
Well, let me back up and say that, for me, the whole reason that I'm in this space of meaning and purpose be is that I experienced the existential vacuum that Dr. Viktor Frankl talks about when I was in my mid 20s, living abroad, great opulent lifestyle. I wasn't working, I didn't have a visa. My boyfriend had a great job. I was just consuming life. And that's where I learned about the importance of being able to do something to be of service to others. And of course, that's, as you and I both know, that is so reflected in the work of logotherapy and Viktor Frankl's work. And so the reason I chose to be an organizational psychologist and not say a clinical psychologist is because I believe in the wonder, power, and nobility of work. I believe in it as a way of being in the world, whatever that is. And I also studied identity for my PhD. So identity and work were kind of my jam. And to your earlier point, I do think that a lot of us, certainly men, tend to put a lot of their identity through their work. And then so if it goes away or it changes in some ways, then they're really at risk for a crisis. So finding a way to be able to have a full life and connect yourself to the fullness of the wonder and beauty of what it is to be alive beyond just work is such an opportunity. And so I could say more about that, but at the same time, I do want the experience of work, whatever that is, to be fulfilling for every individual human, and certainly whether they're CEOs or whether they're individuals, and certainly for men, because I do recognize they carry so much weight on their shoulders related to work and money and taking care of people.
Yeah, and I want to put a pin in that because I don't want to gloss over what you started with, which is your origin story, how you got here. Um, because to me, that is everything. I don't care what somebody letter somebody has next to their name. I care about their experience and what they've been through as much as anything else. So, what was the pivot? What was the shift from that life of opulence, from a very different life? Not that it's not necessarily opulent now, but a very different life that you're living now. What was in Kabbalah? It's called the shattering. What was it that opened you up?
You've helped me really understand the value of that shattering, and it's happened to me a couple of times. But the first part was when I was in my 20s. So I was in this relationship for these 3 years, 26 to the end of 28 years of age. And I'd lived in Spain and Brazil for 3 years, then all over Western Europe, South America, had a full-time live-in maid, a full-time chauffeur, a full-time gardener. I mean, really, it's the kind of thing that most people really dream about. And as I said, I didn't have a work visa, so I was just spending my time really studying my degrees, and that's how I got through a lot of my education by distance. And the relationship was good until it wasn't. But the biggest thing was, my maid, dear Dalva, she would find me in the home literally crying. And I know she thought to herself, what is this white bitch crying about? She's got everything, right? Just to say it straight. And she would be right from the outside. But that's what I discovered be in what I think Viktor Frankl discovered too when he was researching the suicidal patients, that he was working with in Austria, is I didn't have words for it then, but what I realized is when you're just consuming life, as beautiful of a life as I had, there's an emptiness that comes with that. And what we as humans need is to be of service and to strive for something beyond where we're at today. And I didn't have that. And that's where the existential vacuum started to register itself. And ultimately I chose it got bad enough for me in terms of how I felt, the desperation, and then of course our relationship was really also at the same time really crumbling. So after a 1 week skiing trip in Chile and Argentina, I said to him, "Please buy me a one-way ticket back to the United States. I have to get out of this." And I did. So I came back to the United States. I was 28 years old, and I went from having a maid to being a maid. That's the work. The work that I ended up doing was I bought a high-end cleaning business so I could finish my bachelor's degree. But that shattering process of just realizing, I had a friend who came to meet me down there in Brazil, someone that I'd known since middle school, and we had lived together in my late teens. And she came down and she saw the two of us in our interaction, and she said to me, "I don't know who you are." That was part of the shattering process, the necessary mirror, right? That held up, like, no, this is not good. This is not a good place to be. And that process of starting over again, coming back and trying to integrate this new person who I'd become back into my old city and my old stomping grounds was definitely a shattering process.
So that was the shattering of, that's chapter one of my book, What's Your Name, of your identity. And on the other side of that rebuilding, you rebuilt or maybe rediscovered, the true you, the true Dr. Elise. What did that look like? You said well, it's just a beautiful imagery and painful of having a maid to being a maid,
Yeah.
right? I want to hear more about that too, the humility in that process, but also then the rebuilding. Tell us about the rebuilding process of Dr. Elise.
So I worked at, my cleaning business for I think about 15 months while got to a really great place in my master's degree. And then and that process was so great, B, and I know you can appreciate this because I needed that time to be alone and to process my thoughts and my thinking and my experience and not have, when you're cleaning out somebody's home, you're on your own. Nobody else is there. So that process really started the healing that I needed to be able to go on to the next thing. And then I naturally just went out and I started resuming the work that I'd been doing before, which was outside sales. And once I started getting back into that, then it was a natural thing. Then I bought my first house. I got promoted from Portland to Seattle, and life just kind of continued to go on, just like a natural unfoldment process. But it was the hard part was trying to figure out how to take the person I had evolved into through all those catalyzing experiences of living abroad and learning different languages and being in different cultures and putting it back into the place I had come from. It didn't fit anymore.
And so, how long were you in sales?
Most all of my 20s and into my early 30s.
And then when did you start shifting into the, you know, therapeutic realm?
You I guess it's a funny story that fits here. So I'm 32 and I've got a really easy, pretty cush job selling, believe it or not, train loads of baking flour to bakeries and such in California. No intellectual stimulation there at all. Nice life and easy paycheck, etc. And I was like, there's got to be more to life than this. There has to be more than okay. So I've got a decent house. I'm doing vacations, money's coming in. There has to be more than this. And so I thought, well, I'm sure I could probably have an affair with somebody at work. I could go get a nice sports car. I could go to an ashram in India, but none of that seemed to tickle my fancy or scratch my itch. So I did what any sane person I think should do or could do, and that was I went and got a PhD. So it was the answer to my early onset, midlife crisis, which came early. So that's how this whole process began to become, to really evolve and set on the track that I'm on today. Because I thought, if I could develop myself so that I don't have to sell somebody else's product or service, I could become the product as somebody who's a consultant or knows something. I think that's a better path for me, and that's exactly what happened.
So I love that because, just hearing that, knowing the work you're doing today, right, is an obvious evolution of I'm finding my work meaningless. I'm going to find meaning in my work. Therefore, I have experience and I can now share that coupled with, your PhD and your studies. And I think it's a beautiful journey.
It has been. It has been a beautiful journey, and what I would say is for the first bit of it, the I after I graduated with my PhD was 2005. I didn't really put it to work that much. I didn't even call myself Dr. Alise Cortez. Not that I needed that. That's not why I did it. I did it very much to unfold into my potential, which I think that happened. But when I got the itch to start to re-pursue that meaning and work and identity research that I did for my doctoral dissertation, I did that in 2012. And when that happened, and I will tell you, this is something for our listeners and viewers, it was a summons. And I had the good sense to answer it. I was centered and grounded enough that I could hear the summons, I could feel the urgency of it, and I stepped into it. And once I did that, I went back and revisited and expanded that research for my PhD in meaning and work and identity. I found these 15 modes of engagement, and I really found my way into meaning and purpose, and that had set me off on the trek that I'm on today.
So going back to that, I mean, I might call it a calling. I don't know what you want to call it. I love
Definitely.
I love the word vocation. Comes from the Latin vocare, which means voice, right? And obviously, this is your realm of helping people find their voice in their vocation, and you're doing that on your own. What is that voice? What is that? Where does that come from?
It's a good question. Maybe it's different for other people, but for me, it was both from within and without. Like I felt like, and this is the power of this. And so you have to be centered enough, and you have to know yourself well, and be able to drown out enough of the outside world to be able to feel this and hear it. And that's the opportunity for a lot of people who are really busy executives or whatever else. It was both this feeling of like being compelled by the research, like it was coming from within, but it was also like there was like this divining rod that was like I felt like I was literally being pulled by my neck or by the top of my head, to do this research. And um I'm so grateful that I gave myself over to that I was obedient to it.
So I hope I'm not divulging too much privacy here, but you're an Enneagram 7.
I am. Yeah.
and
I'm the
enthusiast.
enthusiast. Yes.
And so Enneagram sevens tend to move through the world with an energy of seeing what's out there, right?
Hmm.
And they don't often describe seeing what's in there.
Mm.
Blaise Pascal's famous quote, I think, applies to sevens. All of life's problems could be solved when an Enneagram seven, I'll add that, learns to sit quietly in an empty room. So the fact that you heard from within, I think, is already a defying your number kind of stance.
Yeah, I definitely did. And, and this is probably something that will register for some of your viewers and listeners too. I would say that in many ways, by being able to hear that voice, hear that, and feel and register that urgency from within and pursuing it, it's what led to a second shattering, which was my divorce.
Mm.
That was an incompatible arrangement for me to pursue this, which I could not do, and to be in that relationship. They was incompatible, and we wanted different things. Um, and I wouldn't trade that. I would not trade the path that I went on, the journey that I went on to stay in that marriage.
Mm. So that second shattering was the sort of liberation of being able to pursue this next chapter, this calling.
Yes, and more of, to be true to the word shattering, it was devastating emotionally, financially. I mean, it was so hard. It wasn't my idea to get a divorce, but it was a good idea. But it hurt like a son of a gun, just for a long time, for years it hurt. So that shattering was, emotional, financial, social, professionally, as I, clawed my way to try to find a way to make a way through this space of meaning and purpose in my consulting. um, it really felt like I was walking, through glass, on glass.
Well, thank you for slowing us down and really unpacking a little bit shattering, because it's just too easy to say the word and to forget what it represents. And I can feel that in what you're describing. Did you know at that moment in time the work of Viktor Frankl? Because this sounds like logotherapy 101.
Yeah. Well, I had encountered Viktor Frankl's work for my PhD studies, which were 1999 to 2005. So I knew, and I, found him, of course. I don't think I was present to his studies as I was going through that shattering process, though. I don't think I was present to his work, his philosophy, his approach at that time.
It is, again, though, defying your number, not just being that number, that energy, because the Enneagram is just how we survive. And the work is not to survive, is to thrive. And to do that,
Yeah.
we have to get beyond this default survival tactic. And yours is a seven, mine is an eight. It's not who you are. Um, but for an Enneagram seven, who tend to be, I call them solar power. They're great when the sun's out, but when the clouds come out, not exactly their jam. And so, the clouds come out, the shattering, and yet you dug into it. You found, without, Viktor Frankl's guidance, you found the meaning, you found purpose over time, and you parlayed that into your next, chapter, your journey of working on purpose.
Well, and I don't think I would have been able to do that, B, if I hadn't leaned into that suffering, right?
Mm.
If I had just, everything's great, everything's fine, I'm gonna be flitted past it, I wouldn't have gotten the benefit of all of that pain.
Yeah.
And so I did get really good, and I am good at spending a lot of time on my own and being able to, really wallow in my sorrow and my pain and feel it, really feel it. So I somehow, I guess, I've defied my number there too, and I would tell you that I didn't do that when I was married. I probably
Mm.
was more flitted around things and put my head in the sand on things. So if I hadn't gone through the catalyzation that came through the pain, I do not believe I would be doing the work that I get to do today, helping organizations to detect and articulate their purpose, and then help them to embed it into their operations and their culture so that it's truly lived and expressed as an organization. I would not be able to do that work today, B, if I hadn't gone through the depths of the darkness and, felt the intensity of that pain.
I know that to be true in my experience of working with sevens. I can't work with a man who's an Enneagram seven until he's had a shattering. It
Mm.
is impossible. There are certain types where that's not true, but generally speaking, for the men who are sevens, they've spent so much time going wide, not deep. staying in front of the, you know, out front of the problems. And then it stops them in their tracks and they have a choice. Either that they can go back to the way it was in that operating system, or they can do what you did, which is dig in, go inward, find the meaning in the suffering. So then you do that, you move into the space of the corporate sector, business, helping, organizational psychology. Tell us about that calling, why that space?
Well, once I did the PhD in organizational development and human development, once I did that and I finished it in 2005, I just had continued on my consulting journey. I'd started off in the human capital space and recruiting, and did that for several years and loved it and until I didn't. And then it was a natural thing of, all right, so the next thing is let's go work on, employee development and learning. And then let's work on employee engagement, measurement, and improvement of the employee experience, and created a business around that as well. And then it was naturally change management and how do organizations, navigate through change, especially with new technologies and new leadership structures. And then it was naturally leadership development and then organizational development. And then now really this niche of, being able to help organizations to activate meaning and purpose through their cultures and the way they actually behave and communicate in order to elevate that energy, to align heads, hearts, and hands around the purpose. So that you can see there was just really, honestly, a natural evolution. And this is another big part of it. We need some, I firmly believe we need some catalyzation in here. In addition to that inward journey, in the last 10 years alone, I have read 500 books, largely in preparation for my podcast, and I've written five. Those things just kept, churning up and catalyzing more evolution, more growth, and more ways to express what could I do to help. And so I have an intensity about me that I know that, maybe some of the people don't quite have. And that's been a big part of my fuel. It just keeps me going.
So that brings us back to what I said before, put a pin in the first question I asked you, but here we are now with a deeper backstory and a greater appreciation for why you do what you do. Coming back to the corporate sector or business in general, professions, what's going on in this space? Because in your most recent book, I believe it was, you talk about the great revitalization, right? So can you kind of give us a lay of the land of meaning, of purpose as it's evolved, however you want to define that, and where we're at in the sort of the current world we live in?
Such a great question. So first, you sort of asked this before, and I don't know that I fully answered it. I've been riveted on the world of work in part because it's been so important to my own journey. It's catalyzed so much of me working toward my own potential. And it's a big part of how we spend our lives at work. And I want that to be a better experience for people than it is for most of them. Currently, the Gallup organization says that we have 31% engagement in the United States and 17% disengagement, full on disengagement, meaning I'm working against the system and what we're doing here. Across the world, we have a 20% engagement rate. Those should be alarming numbers for people. And if we could just situate what that really means for an organization. If you are a leader or a business owner in the United States and you've got a team of 10 people, what that means is you have 3 of them that are pulling forward to try to make things happen for you. And you have 7 of them that are holding steady or pulling you back. I don't know how you get anything done with that. If that doesn't just immediately raise your concern, I don't know how to help you. Right. So what we're seeing, especially as the generations continue to come forth and express their needs and wants, Gen Y or the millennials and have been really big on wanting to live, their values and not to work in a way that went against their values. Gen Z comes along and they're like, hey, if the work isn't meaningful and I don't feel like I'm going to be part of something that really matters, I'm not interested. I'll be happy to stay on my parents' couch. And so what that means is that organizations that really want to survive in today's world need to be able to create a culture and a way of communicating the value of their people and what they're doing, connect those individual roles to the purpose of the organization and why it matters in the world. And that's absolutely a big part of what we teach leaders and managers to be able to do. It can't just be, hey, do your job because that's what I pay you for.
Mm.
That is 1995 language. And so today it's you've got to be able to see that you as a leader. So we teach them how can you communicate, how can you actually see the arc of what you're doing as an organization? Why does it matter? Why should anybody care? How is it actually helping the community, the world, whatever? And then you've got to be able to communicate that to your people, not just, every 6 months or the performance review, but throughout the week. And so it's one of the things that I think is so great about the generation piece is you will hear every generation say that the one that comes behind them, oh my God, we're going to hell in the handbasket with this new generation. But in my view, B, if you look at the generations, every one of them has helped enable us, help extend us. They've extended our capabilities and made us better humans, right? So the boomers taught us about being, on this straight steady course to be able to provide for their families and such. The Gen Xers came along, that's you and I, who said, hey, I still feel like there's room for independence. I want to make some choices about how I'm spending my time and engaging my talents in organizations. And I want some independence. And then the millennials came along and said, hey, did you guys get the memo that you don't have to work 60 or 70 hours a week? Did you get that memo? And let's live our values here and feel like we can, go to bed with our conscience intact at night. And then, of course, the Z comes along and says, hey, the meaning and purpose is where it's at. So, what that means is leaders and organizations just have to work harder to be able to meet those discerning demands. And when they do, they will be rewarded for it.
So are corporations, our businesses willing and able to face what you faced, in your shattering, to stop moving, stop being human doing, right? And just stand your, Viktor Frankl, make your defiant stand in it, face what the struggle, what the suffering is, because that's not traditionally in the space they've operated. I'm so relieved that you and people like you are out in the business sector, because the previous incarnation of you was, how to win friends and influence people, the power of positive thinking, right? Those sort of even Think and Grow Rich, and all of these had a great foundation starting point. But as you're talking about, they've evolved just like the generations have evolved. Our business is evolving.
Well, I'd like to say that, that this is obvious to business leaders. I don't think it is. I think this, what I've just been describing might even sound very foreign and remote to a lot of business owners or leaders who are like, hey, I just need to make the bottom line. I need to make the revenue, the EBITDA. That's where my focus is. There are definitely a growing number of what I would call, evolved leaders, people that are maybe a part of conscious capitalism or other such organizations that see how much business can be a force for good in the world when it's done well. And what I will also tell you is that the people who work with us are I can't think of a time when somebody said, hey, Alise, we want to work with you because we just want to be best in class and ahead of the curve. And so we want to, nobody, I can't remember a time. How we end up working with people is they have some kind of a business problem or an issue that has given them a bit of a shattering element. And they're like, oh my gosh, whatever we've been doing before isn't working anymore. And I don't know what to do. That is a perfect client for us. They are not meeting their revenue goals. Their people are leaving and they don't know why. They can't backfill them. Their customers are starting to complain for service levels, or that now their revenues are impacted, or customers are leaving. That's who oftentimes hires SB. And then the other person, the other group that tends to hire us, this is a perfect example, is somebody that really understands that if they'll work through our 7-point framework that we offer the organizations, what that does it positions the organizations that are competing for talent against people who have much deeper pockets, and they're more attractive to the talent pool because of it. And now they see they've got a competitive advantage if they actually will do what we teach them to do.
Wow, so powerful. Yeah, Viktor Frankl, as you know, better than anybody, talks about 3 ways to meaning: what we create, contribute, do, what we experience, what we take in, what we receive. And those are great. But in my experience, and I think Dr. Frankl might agree with this, in suffering, in the struggle, in the pain points that you're describing, is where I don't know if the meaning is more ripe or ready, but we're more ready. And it sounds like, that's where you're meeting companies as well.
Percent well said. Yeah. Mhm.
So when I start working with a man, I say to him, what's your why? And 99% of the time, they look at me with the blank stare, or they rattle off the Hallmark section of Father's Day cards. What does that look like in the business realm? I know Simon Sinek came on and didn't quote our good teacher, but certainly took his principles, start with why. And I know there was a kind of a craze or a interest in starting with why, what, how. Are businesses or organizations really embodying that?
No. So let me back up and say first, when I'm out speaking to audiences, and I speak at a lot of conferences, and I speak to local groups as well, lots of HR groups that bring me in, I will invariably first ask the audience at some point, what are you passionate about? So that's going to speak a lot to that first source of meaning, which is our creative contributions, etc. And invariably, the most common answer across all my audiences, I get things like family and work and travel and all that sort of thing. But the most common answer I get when I ask audiences at large, "What are you passionate about?" is, "I don't know."
Hmm.
So that goes back to the hamster wheel. You're going so fast and furious. They realize in that moment they don't have an answer to the question of what am I passionate about. So you can well guess what's the answer to how many of you know what your purpose is. Even less, right? Now, there's no judgment in this because one, I have been a member of the Walking Dead myself, which is a big reason why I do the work that I do, is to be able to resurrect that, beautiful, precious soul back into its fuller existence. But that just speaks to the problem. And so many organizations are not talking or creating the conditions for people to experience or even share their passion, and they're not really addressing the purpose piece. Many organizations have, the plaque on the wall that says, here is our purpose, mission, vision, and values. And when you ask their employees about it, they go desperately looking to find that plaque so they can recite it for you. It doesn't live in their heart.
Mm.
They can't remember it. So again, the work that we do is to be able to help organizations to be able to, one, articulate that purpose so it's known in people's heads, help them align that individually through the individual's values, because you and I both know that the meaning is activated through our values. So if we can help the individual employees understand how the purpose of the organization is connected to and allows them to express their values, now it's in their heart. And then we help them understand how their day-to-day work contributes to and allows the organizations to express and live that purpose. Now it's in their hands. And most organizations are not doing any of those things.
I worked with a guy who worked for a large conglomerate that helped, I don't know, schools, systems with their retirement funds and planning, properly for their teachers. And then he went to retire and his company treated him miserably. And it's like, man, you can say the values, but if you're not embodying them, then it's just empty rhetoric, which I hear you saying there's a lot of that out there.
And yet when we do this well, when organizations learn to do this, they get such loyalty from their people. They get such a commitment, such a perseverance to go the extra mile to help their colleagues and their teammates to come through on the work. There's such a great return on investment when we learn how to do this well. And what I would argue in today's world of AI, part of the reason that we created the Gusto Now movement, which is doubling down on humanity in the age of AI, is to help individuals and organizations to better develop that humanity, to develop their creativity, their relational intelligence, their emotional intelligence, their judgment, so that they are more able and adept at being able to collaborate with AI as equal partners and to be extended by AI, not replaced by it.
Yeah, there's a statistic, I can't remember what it is, but when men commit suicide, a disproportionate amount of it is tied to work, finances, work, profession, identity. And I just think that this has been so unattended in the workplace. In fact, I'm going to be focusing the 13 Minutes mission. I think one of the focuses will be on the construction industry. It's got that and agriculture have the highest rates of suicide. And now you hear in the construction industry, they're waking up to it. There's efforts for mental health and wellness. So that gives me hope, right? That organizations or industries are starting to see the consequences of not having done this work. Has that been your experience? Are we trending in the right direction?
I don't know if I can say that, but what I will say is, I'm sure you don't know this because it's new, but I have recently become a Vistage chair. Vistage is a peer advisory business executive coaching program membership for business owners, CEOs, and leaders, etc. And one of the reasons that I chose to do this, I was recruited to do this, and it's a perfect complement to what we do with leadership and culture, because we're really helping the CEO work on their business, but at the same time work on themselves. Because I think one of the things that probably contributes to the suicide rate for men is you're running a business or whatever, and you don't have anybody to talk to about your issues and your problems. So you're just trying to go it alone. And part of what, Vistage does, it gives a platform for people to be able to share their media's darkest, hairiest issues with their peers and get help and guidance and advice to be able to move through that. And I think that goes a long way to be able to take away that feeling of, man, there's no one for me to turn to. I don't know what else to do. The pressure is overwhelming. And I mean, the only way out I see is to commit suicide.
So glad you brought that point up because, the 13 minutes mission is addressing two pain points. One is a why, a meaning, a purpose, and the other is loneliness. And so to, combat loneliness, we started men's peer groups. We actually borrowed from YPO, EO, Vistage, their what they call forum. Do they call them forums in Vistage?
No.
No. It's the group, it's a peer group, whatever.
Yeah.
So, and one of the things we found was that because my co-founders come from EOYPO, and what they said was, I haven't been in one, that the groups are as much about personal as they are about professional, right?
100%. Yeah.
Although they're not framed as such, they're framed as business networking, leadership development, et cetera. But and this is what I say to men. They come in sometimes, their company's paying for them to come in, so they think we have to stick to, the business
Right.
topic. And what I say to them is, there's no such thing, right? A human being is a circle. And if you expand in one direction, you're expanding in all directions. And just giving, particularly men, permission to talk about their personal side of things has been, I don't know, a revelation for some of them. Has that been your experience?
100%. And it's a big reason why I continue doing this, right? It's to be able, well, part of the reason that I do the work that I do working with organizations and leaders is it's intimate. I mean, if when you're doing this right, I ought to know, some of their deepest worries and their concerns and how things are going with their spouse and their children. If I don't, I'm not doing it right. And so, yeah, I mean, this is a place for people to really share, and that's what they often say is, I've never told anybody this before. And when I hear that, I know we're on the right track.
Yeah, a friend of mine compared it to what's happened with architecture of houses. I grew up in a house with lots of rooms, and now we have a house that's an open floor plan. And getting rid of those walls and opening up the space, and it's just there's an energy, there's a authenticity, there's a vulnerability in that. And I use that analogy with, especially working with men, of can we create an open floor plan where we're not compartmentalizing everything. And that is a tall ask, but a necessary one, I think, especially for men.
It is. And the other thing, the long related to that, be that I think you'll appreciate is that a lot of the work that we're doing, in fact, even for Vistage, we need to be able to get on an emotional level with our prospective members to be able to see how they can see the value in what we would do. And what I've discovered in that process of going through the training to be a Vistage chair is, for a lot of people, men and women, they have a really hard time sitting in that emotional space with their prospective members. They can't ask the questions about their emotions. How do you feel about that kind of thing? Because this is the world that we live in. We live in passion and inspiration. But we have to be in the emotions. And so part of the work that we've been doing is helping people to better understand their own emotions, to put names to them beyond I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm mad. I'm jubilant. I'm excited. I'm devastated, right? These are very different ways to describe how we feel. And for most people, we start off as kids being able to have this full spectrum of knowing exactly how we feel. And then we go to school and that gets erased out of us. We go to the workplace and it really gets erased out of us. So by the time I meet people who I can help and work with, when they start this far with their emotions, I meet them, they're about like this, right? They have this small little emotional spectrum arena, and part of the work is to start to open that spectrum back up again so that they can feel what's happening for them. They can understand that they're going through a shattering. They can understand that they feel a need to do something different with their lives. But if they can't get access to their feelings, that's really hard to get to the data that is available to them to share that there's a necessary change here, and that you're being invited to take it.
So true. And the one of the reasons why that happens, at least I can only speak as a man, is because it's bred into us. You can say be vulnerable, but vulnerability is not rewarded, especially in the workplace, right? It's real easy to say, bring your problems here, share whatever, and you get penalized in a lot of different ways if the culture isn't set up to do what you're talking about.
That's exactly right, which is it's precarious. So we encourage people to be vulnerable, but then if we beat them down because they didn't have the right answer, I don't agree with that. That didn't work. And now that was like saying, just kidding, just kidding. We didn't really mean for you to be vulnerable and share what you really feel. So yeah, and so that creating that space where they can be rewarded and encouraged to continue to share how they really feel about something. And you and I both know through our work that sometimes when men and women start really sharing that, relationships necessarily change and sometimes dissolve because they no longer fit what they were created for.
How do we create more vulnerability? How does Vistage do it? How do you do it in the workplace? Men's peer groups, we've really almost had to re-educate men in authenticity and vulnerability in being in relationship, particularly with other men. What are some ways that you're finding that works?
First, let me also say, as a woman, how much I really empathize with the burden that men carry. That I'm a social scientist as well. You are conditioned not to have access to your feelings and to buck up and be strong and hold the load and such. And I really want to first situate how much I empathize with that. I can't sympathize because I don't feel it the same way that you do, but I see it in the wreckage of men. I see it in their often inability to be able to be with their feelings, to express themselves, to really say what they think and feel and what they want from someone, what they would really like from them. So I think the way that gets um, further developed and encouraged is to be part of a men's group like what you're doing, so that they can actually see that men can really hold a beautiful space for each other. The brotherhood that you create in your groups, I would venture to say that a lot of men have never experienced that. So so therefore it gets reinforced that there are actually other men out there who live this way, who interact this way, and it doesn't make me weird or weak if I do.
Yeah, and I don't know enough about the Vistage model, but from what I understand from my co-founders is that it accomplishes the same thing at a more business level for business leaders, but it creates this space to kind of gradually bring them in. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the most important thing to say probably about the Vistage community is, as a chair, we select our members. So we're not really out looking to recruit people. We're looking for people who will be they're people who are they're learning oriented. They have some humility about them. They know that they need some help, and they're willing to contribute to their fellow members. And so, that whole process there alone, we're selecting people. We're not, selling to people. We're not coercing people. Where there it needs to be a mutual selection process. And some people who may want to join may not be the right fit for my group, but maybe somebody else's group. And so that whole selection process, and then of course, even the very beginning of it, we are working on the personal stuff. We are asking them, to share their real story of how they became who they are, and a lot of executive CEOs have never done that in front of other people. So there's already a natural process that starts with that. And then of course you have the issue processing part of the afternoon, which is where you're going to share your various issues and get perspective and insight from your fellow members. But and even that has vulnerability to it, right? Coming in and saying, I have this thing, this major issue, and I have no idea how to tackle it. That right there requires a ton of vulnerability.
Hmm.
So having somebody else ready to go to do that, to show and model the way, is critical, or else it really won't take off. It won't work.
Right, because these are the people who got to the top by not saying "I don't know,"
That's
right?
exactly right.
So it's a whole re-engineering, and you got to do it in a safe context. And I'm just so grateful that you're out there doing it. What percentage of the Vistage members, at least that you're leading, are men?
Well, I'm just building my group. So right now there's probably four of them. So to launch a group, you need 8 members, and four of them are men. Definitely want that. I want that diversification of perspective and life experience. So definitely want women as well. But you probably know this, but the Vistage community itself has been around for like 65 years. I think there's like 45,000 members across the world in 20 different countries. I don't know what the stats are. I would venture to guess a lot of them are men, but I don't. That would be an interesting stat to look into.
So, I guess starting to wrap up, I know you got a lot on your plate, but as far as men in the workplace, right? What are some things we can offer them to help them fulfill Dr. Frankl's really life purpose, which in many ways was to help people find meaning in work, a major piece of his focus. What are some things you could offer?
Well, I would say that the program that we have a signature program that we offer, which would allow them to do the same thing on their own. But if you really first understand, your strengths, what are you good at in the world? What is it that you bring to the party, if you will? What are your values? As you know, through being a logotherapist, we our meaning is activated along our values. Most people don't even know what their values are, and I don't mean just you know spitball them. I mean identify the top 10 and prioritize them, and then consider how are you actually living those values. How are you doing that at work? How are you doing that in your family? The purpose piece of it, the passion too is important. When you think about passion, that's both expressing your contributions and what can you do in the world. It's also where do you want to aim your talents, and maybe that also leads you to your why. Your why should be something that really compels you, that makes you question. Why am I here, and how can I be of service? Right. So one of the things that people get wrong about purpose is they think it's like I heard somebody say, my purpose is to double my income in 12 months. That's not purpose. That's a goal. Purpose is always about serving something beyond yourself. So what do you care about? What compels you? What breaks your heart? What can you not do? A lot of people haven't taken the time to consider those things. And then when you consider, is that available for you to express through your current workplace today? It probably is, if you look for it. If you do those simple things, you'll go a long way to be able to start to tap into that beautiful meaning reserve that's available for all of us every day, every moment when we learn how to tap into it.
Such an important point. A teacher of mine once said when I became a rabbi, just remember this, it's easier to change your audience than your talk. It takes a lot of work to speak to the same audience over and over, week in, week out. And that's a dedication. It's just easier to give one talk to 100 audiences.
Right.
And I see this with men in particular. It's easier to change your audience than your talk. It's easier to change your wife than to do the work. It's easier to change your job than to find meaning in it. It's a natural inclination that I think you're really challenging them to defy. At least start where you stand, right?
I like that. Start where you stand, and yeah, you're probably there's much more available to you in your current relationship, your current employer, your current company than you probably have been able to notice before.
And that's how, if you do leave at that point, right, whether it's a marriage or whether it's a job, you've left no stone unturned. You've
Yes,
done the
right.
work, and
That's right.
all relationships come to an end in one way or another, whether it's personal or whether it's professional. But it's how we get there is so important.
And how we navigate through that change is so important.
So tell our audience before we kind of wrap up, what's the most exciting thing you're doing work wise right now? What do you want people to know about?
Mm, Most exciting thing work-wise is definitely working with this new company on our very signature process, helping them to detect and articulate their purpose together, wildlife scratch together, and start to work through the process of embedding it into their everyday culture and ways of working, and then developing the leaders to be inspirational, the managers on the front line to be managers, stewarding meaning, communicating the value of everyday work. That just never gets old, B. It is our best, highest service, and when we find organizations that want to come with us on that journey, I mean, it's glorious.
I love it. So good. How can people get a hold of you?
You can always find me on LinkedIn, Alise Cortez. You can go to our main website, which is gusto-now.com. That's where you'll find all the leadership and culture work that we do.
Awesome. And get all of your 75 books.
5 books.
Oh, I thought you said 75. It just seems like it. You're so prolific. So, Alise, it has been a pleasure working with you over the years and talking with you on your podcast and now on my podcast. And I just really appreciate, honor the work you're doing on so many levels, not the least of which is, one of my life purposes is to be a evangelical, emissary of Dr. Viktor Frankl and spread his word, because I don't believe it has been spread like it should be and could be. And I do see you are one of the few people who are doing that, particularly in the workplace. So thank you so much for your contributions.
Thank you, B. And likewise, it's an honor to be connected with you in life and to be on the other side on your podcast. Thanks for having me.
Well, I know this is yet one of many conversations we will continue to have. And until next time, thank you. It's been an honor and privilege.
Thank you, B.
Okay. Take care.